13 weeks, no days off, 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night. I said, this is like a marathon. And I said, what do marathon runners do? And I researched it and I talked to some marathon runners. And when you run a marathon, your goal is to cross, 42 kilometers, 42.2 kilometers. Not many people are designed to do that, but a lot of people run them. But what they do is, when they start that race, they close their eyes and they visualize crossing the finish line. The night before the race, they dream about crossing that finish line. But when they start the race, they set little goals along the way. And I've got to get to kilometer 3, and 10, and 12. And by applying those principles in our daily lives, we're able to take those overwhelming goals and make them a lot more manageable. And we celebrate the victories along the way. When you get to kilometer 3, it's a celebration, and 12, and 18. And by the time you cross that 42-kilometer finish line, you've been able to break it down and make it a lot more manageable. But I think there are 3 key traits that every good leader has. And these I want to share with you. 1, they understand a term called practical execution. Now, what does that mean? Well, practical execution means actions speak louder than words. Most people go through life and they talk a great game. They're going to accomplish this at work. They're going to achieve this in their home life. They're going to achieve this spiritually. But 99.9% of them, it's just talk. When you understand the term practical execution, you put your head down, you keep your mouth shut, and you let your actions speak for you. Secondly, leaders understand the importance of being agile, being able to adjust, being able to react, being able to take those blinders off and make changes as they go. On The Apprentice, had I not been agile, I don't know if the outcome would have been the same. You see, on the final task in the US of The Apprentice, we had to hire back the people who were just fired. Did you have to do that on your show? So these people were just fired. They were competing with me weeks prior, and now they had to become my employees. And I said to myself, wait a minute. These people were just fired. I can't manage them like I would a normal team in corporate America. And I changed my management style. And I became a micromanager. And I double and triple checked everything they did. They thought I was crazy. Now my competitor who went to Harvard, great school, he followed the Harvard textbook to the letter of the law. And he managed his team just like that textbook taught him. Well, that textbook forgot about one person. When I said the name Omarosa, does that ring a bell to you guys? He had this woman on his team named Omarosa, and she was not good. She sabotaged everything he did. She was setting these traps for him to fall into. But he wasn't agile. He didn't adjust. He had the blinders on, and he didn't see that it was a different landscape. So it's about practical execution. It's about agility. And lastly, it's about risk. It's about understanding risk, respecting risk, managing risk, and converting risk into success. Now, success is a funny word. And I often wonder, why are some people successful, and statistically speaking, the majority not? And for me, it comes down to one word. And that word is fear. That's right. I don't know if you knew this, but when we're born into the world, we're only born with 2 natural fears. The fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. And every other fear we have is learned. And so many people are afraid they're going to fail. They're afraid they're going to make a mistake. They're afraid what their friends or colleagues are going to say, that they never even try. And in my opinion, that's the biggest failure of them all. I think Emerson said it best when he said, always, always, always do what you're afraid to do, and success will follow you. Now, when I first got hired on by Trump, I was scared. I know all about fear, trust me. I thought, how am I going to survive working with Donald Trump? I'm just a small business owner from Chicago. And about 2 weeks after I got hired on, Donald Trump called me on my cell phone, and it's the call that I claim really set the tone of our relationship. And he called me up, he said, Bill, Donald here. He said, I need you to do me a favor. I said, of course. He said, I need you to get on my plane with me tomorrow and fly down to Quito, Ecuador, because I want you to be a judge at my Miss Universe contest. I said, Donald, I'm a company man. I will take one for the team here. That was a long time ago, before you. No, you were way too young. But I have to give him credit where credit is due, because when I first got hired on, I thought, okay, this is a TV show. I'm probably never going to see this guy again. But that was not the case. He held up his end of the bargain. He took me under his wing. He showed me what business is like at that level. And for me, I found it to be remarkable because I realized that business at his level isn't much different than business at our level. I learned that the fundamentals of business never change. And in your jobs, if you can master and understand the basic fundamentals of business and use those as your foundation, that's how you can rise within the ranks here. When you say, wait a minute, I may not know everything, but I'm going to learn. And I'm going to use these basic fundamentals, and I'm going to build, and I'm going to build, and I'm going to build. Just like when you build a high-rise. When you build a high-rise, you can have the most attractive-looking building in the world. But if that foundation isn't built in bedrock, and those caissons aren't in the ground, it's going to crumble. So for me, when I got hired on, I was sent to work on a building in Chicago. And I'd never built a high-rise before. I thought, oh my goodness. So before I went to Chicago, I was sent to a town called White Plains, New York, to learn how these high-rises are built. And I had to shadow a fellow who was the chairman of a major construction company. And we talk about fear. My first day on the job, I met this guy. And he's this big, burly guy from Brooklyn. He had a thick Brooklyn accent. He owned a construction company, and he was Italian. Well, this is the same year the Sopranos TV show was very popular. Did you guys get that over here? So my mind was racing. I thought, oh my goodness. I called my mom. I said, I don't know if I'm going to make it home tonight. But it turned out this man was brilliant, and he still is. He's a very dear friend of mine today. And he taught me a very important lesson about being a good leader. And it was a couple days on the job, and I'm walking out of the office, and this guy turned to me in his thick Brooklyn accent. He said, hey kid, he said, be the conductor. I said, okay, have a good night. I had no idea what he meant by that. I just was afraid to ask. And as I'm riding back into Manhattan, I started thinking, be the conductor. What was this guy getting at? Was he referring to the conductor of a locomotive? Where was he going? And then it hit me. He was referring to the conductor of an orchestra. You see, the conductor of an orchestra has all these expert musicians in his or her pit. And boy, they play those instruments to absolute perfection. The conductor himself is not an expert at playing each and every one of those instruments, but he can get them to play beautiful music in harmony. The moral of the story is if we want to be a good leader in any area of our life, we have to learn how to conduct. We have to check our ego at the door and say, wait a minute, maybe there's a better way to do this. Maybe there's someone who's smarter than I am who can help me. And we have to conduct that music in our lives, in our relationships, saying, wait a minute, maybe there's a better way I can solve this problem with my spouse, and taking the blinders off. There's nothing worse than a know-it-all. And I see these people all the time. I travel all over the world. I've been doing this job for 15 years. Don't tell me how to do my job. I know what I'm doing. Those are the people who end up here. The ones who open up and look from the outside in and say, wait a minute, maybe things aren't as I see them. You see, in life, sometimes we see things the way we want to, not necessarily what's reality. And I always use the analogy, remember when you were a kid, and the first time you talked into a tape recorder and you played it back, and you said, that's not me. I don't sound like that. You do. And in life, you see, the people who can look at from the outside in and say, am I doing things the way I really think I'm doing them? Because oftentimes we're going to be surprised that that's not how it is. In our mind, it's playing out a certain way. But when we step back and we look in, I think we'll all be a little bit surprised. When we play that tape recorder back and we find out how we really sound. That's part of conducting. Also, as a conductor, one of the important things that I found is the value in people watching. Any people watchers in the room? No? No one watches? No one's a people watcher here? You can learn so much good and bad just by observing and watching and seeing what's happening. And I've done that. And I've been very fortunate over the last 10 years because I've gotten to spend some time with some amazing leaders. Richard Branson and Donald Trump and you name it, across the board. I've been able to spend a lot of time with these folks. And I've watched them and I've studied them. And I realized that although they have completely different personalities, they all have 3 identical traits. And I think these are traits that we can use in all areas of our lives. 1, they're all good decision makers. This may seem very basic to some of you, but the majority of people go through life and they have a very difficult time making decisions. And you know what happens? They let opportunities pass them by. Because they have what's called analysis paralysis. They have one foot on the boat and they have one foot on the pier, and they don't, should I go to land, should I go to sea? And they never commit. And what happens is those people look back on their lives with tremendous regret. And they say, well, I could have been this or I could have been that. And they talk about what they could have been. They don't talk about what they've accomplished and what they've achieved. Secondly, all these leaders are creative. They find creative ways to market themselves, to market their ideas, their brands, to work through the ranks in their corporation. They find their version of those Coke bottle glasses that I had sent out to those radio stations. And thirdly, they all have that never quit, never make excuse mindset. I see it today more than I've ever seen in my life. The minute a problem arises, most people go through life and they point to their left and they point to their right and they blame the person on either side of them. The leaders, the truly successful ones, point the finger at themselves and they realize that they're in control of their destiny. They're going to work harder than everyone else, they're going to be more creative, and they're going to seize those opportunities when they come their way. So I've been lucky to be around some great leaders. And then I recently worked on a show in the United States called We Mean Business. I don't know if that came out here yet. But it's a show where I got to go in and work with people in different businesses who were failing and try to turn them around. And I've watched these people as well. And I noticed that they all have three identical traits, much different than the three that I just talked about. And if we have these traits and we look from the outside in and we say, wait a minute, I'm doing what Bill said I'm doing, we may want to reevaluate. One, they're all reactive rather than proactive. You guys know people like this? They wait for the problem to arise, and then they put those fires out, and they question why they never get ahead in life. Well, the people who get ahead in life are the ones who are anticipating the problems and coming up with solutions before those problems even rear their head. Secondly, they all surround themselves around negative people. An interesting study I read in the United States, it was a major university, it came out, and it had published this article. And it said that the majority of the people we come into contact with on a daily basis are negative. It went on to say that you're never going to be able to eliminate those people from your lives, but if you're aware of who they are and what their intentions are, you negate their power. And when you're on a track to success, when you're rising up through the ranks, when you're doing things that other people wish they could do, when you're working harder than other people, when you're coming up with better ideas, there's always going to be a handful of people who feel the need to pull you down in order to build themselves up. They're jealous, they're envious, they wish they had your drive, your ambition, your creative mind, but they don't, and it bothers them, and they want to tug you down. That buddy of mine who laughed at my idea when I told him about the Cigar the Month Club, who said it was never going to work, I ran into him. I was at a fundraiser about 2 years ago, and this guy came running up to me, "Hey, Bill, buddy, I knew you were going to be successful." Not so sure about that. So they're reactive rather than proactive. They are surrounding themselves around negative people. We have to be very cautious and be observant. And lastly, it's about potential. Potential is probably the best God-given asset we have, yet it's the most underutilized. And I truly believe that when we're born into this world, we're given a certain amount of currency in the form of potential. And it's up to us to make it grow. It's up to us to make it multiply. Yet so many of us don't do anything with it. And I always tell people, and a lot of young people in this room, you have to reverse engineer your life. You have to say to yourself, when I'm 70 years old, will I be proud of what I've done? What I'm doing today, will it get me to where I want to be? Will my kids be proud of what I've accomplished? Will my grandchildren look up to me as a role model? And only you know the answer to that. And that is understanding your potential. Understanding your ability to push yourself. To find ways to achieve things that you never thought were possible. I want to end with this story. I was reading a book the other day, and this gentleman has a very interesting perspective on the power of potential. And this is what he writes. He said, "I heard somebody say the wealthiest place on earth is not Fort Knox or the oil fields in the Middle East, nor is it the gold and diamond mines in South Africa. Ironically, the wealthiest places on earth are the cemeteries. Because lying in those graves are all kinds of dreams and desires that will never be fulfilled. Buried beneath the ground are books that will never be written, businesses